All right, welcome everyone. And for those of you who've been waiting, again, our apologies. We had technical difficulties. We've been trying to get online now for about 25 minutes, so there we go. So for a late start, just so anyone who comes to view this in future days, weeks, months, or whatever, given this situation that we're going to be talking about to begin with, we thought it would be wise to vocally give you the date. This is the day after Friday the 13th in the month of October 2023. And for those who did not get wished a happy Friday the 13th, I wish you all belated happy Friday the 13th. And having said that, let's talk to God as we get launched, and then we'll get involved in some of the questions. Father, thank you for this opportunity to be here. Thank you that you enable us once again to overcome technical difficulties, and we thank you for this opportunity to interact with some important things and some important questions. And so we ask for clarity, good communication, for understanding, for easy integration of this material into our lives so that we can more effectively represent you and reflect you to those around us. And for this we're grateful, and we're grateful for those who have joined us now and who will join us in the future. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay. In having our conversation today, we thought what we would like to do is deal with, rather than to start with deal with the questions that have been sent in, deal with current affairs. Now, just to let you know, we have questions that were sent in on reincarnation, on the rapture, and more coming, but we wanted to start with, shall we put it, current events. And to get things launched, and by current events I'm talking about the war in the Middle East right now between Hamas and Israel.
Which started a week ago.
Yes, which started a week ago, exactly a week ago, now that I'm thinking of it. And it started just before, interestingly enough, I was scheduled to fly to Israel. And as I was about to leave the house, thanks to some notes that Patrice left behind, I checked a couple things out. I called the airlines, and while I was on the phone with the airlines, I got a text saying your flight has been canceled. So otherwise I would just have been returning from Israel a day or two ago. So this has had immediate impact, and all that by way of a context and a background to what's going on now. What I thought I'd like to do to start things off is to share something that was written by a friend of ours, the rabbi, soon to be Dr. Joshua Brumbach. He posted this on Facebook, I believe it was yesterday.
And he's the rabbi of Messianic Synagogue in
West Haven, Connecticut. Okay? And it's a lengthier post, but it's an important post, and it's going to be important for us to consider not only now, but in the days and probably weeks, possibly months to come. It says, regarding Israel, Israel is entirely in a no-win situation. Doing nothing is not an option, particularly when rockets continue to fall and 150 hostages are held in Gaza. Children, babies, women, men, elderly. A siege on Gaza to pressure the release of the hostages is brutal. No water, electricity, or aid which comes through Israel. Quick pause here. Not all of the water, electricity, and aid that Gaza receives comes through Israel. Israel's not the only source, but the Israeli sources have been shut down. Okay, continuing with what Joshua has to say. A siege on Gaza to pressure the release of the hostages is brutal, but has the chance of preserving more innocent lives than the third option, a full and entire reoccupation of Gaza, where countless lives on both sides will be lost. The death toll will be huge. And what happens the day after? Israel would not be in this situation if Saturday's barbaric and senseless attack by Hamas did not happen. Additionally, Israel would not be in this situation if it were not for the historical context of the surrounding countries attacking Israel in 1948, 1967, and 1973. And they were, by the way, I'll also throw in something here, and have been rocket attacks numerous times since then. In fact, on one of our trips to Israel, we left literally the day before the onslaught of such rocket attacks. It was for one of our study tours of Israel. Back to what Joshua was saying. Egypt did not want Gaza back in the peace deal in 1977, although it gladly accepted back the Sinai Peninsula, where there is oil, and even now refuses to intervene to help the Palestinian people of Gaza.
Isn't the 1977, isn't that the Carter Peace Accords
That was
at Camp David?
No, this was not that. This
It
was the
wasn't?
one that Sadat signed.
Right, and that's what I'm assuming
yeah.
is the same thing.
There was more after that.
Begin, Menachem Begin.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, Begin and Sadat.
Sadat signed that in
Yes.
77, so
Yeah.
that's the one we're talking about.
That's the one. Okay, Egypt did not want Gaza back in the peace deal in 1977, although it gladly accepted back the Sinai Peninsula, where there is oil, and even now refuses to intervene to help the Palestinian people of Gaza. In 2002, Israel, in an anticipation of peace and harmony, returned Gaza to its own people to self-rule. However, Hamas, a terrorist organization, and again, let me pause briefly, and it is considered a terrorist organization by many nations throughout the world. It is labeled as such. So now I'm going to leave that alone. However, Hamas took control of Gaza and soon began launching terror attacks from Gaza. The result was over time an increased blockade for Israel's safety and security. Of course, Israel is not perfect, and those who know me personally know I have been quite critical of certain Israeli policies, and particularly the current government. I have especially been critical of the treatment of Palestinians and other minorities. But the double standard toward Israel must stop. No other country would passively do nothing following the surprise slaughter of 1,300 of its civilians, the beheading of babies, rape, brutal murders of entire families, parading bodies in the streets, dragged behind cars and motorcycles, and the taking of 150 hostages. Blaming Israel and claiming we deserve this is the typical age-old trope of constantly blaming the Jewish people for our own suffering. It is purely anti-Semitic. This is a horrible situation, and I desperately pray somehow for an end to this war and continued suffering for Jews and Palestinians. But the blame is squarely on Hamas, and the world must come together to give peace a chance and condemn Hamas and allow the people of Gaza, Israel, and the world relief from their oppressive regime. End quote.
Okay, I don't think anybody that we have heard on television, commenting on all this, has said point blank that this organization called Hamas, it's not made up of just people from Gaza. In fact, the minority of Hamas might be people from Gaza. It's an Islamic terrorist organization, and the people who run it may very well be from another nation in the Middle East. But to assume that Hamas is purely Palestinian or purely people from Gaza is wrong. It's a mixture of like-minded people who've gotten together to somehow free Gaza from the grip, quote-unquote, of Israel. Israel tried to give them up in 1977, and Egypt would have none of it. They did not want to have it at all.
I'm going to share some further reflections in just a second, but a quick reflection that popped in my mind as you were talking about it. If you are familiar with the Israeli warnings over the last couple of days for the evacuation of Gaza, please be aware of the fact that Israel is not suggesting that the people of Gaza evacuate Gaza. What they're saying is evacuate the northern part of Gaza and go to the south of Gaza. I have heard too often that people say, well, where could they go? They can't evacuate Gaza. That's not what the warning was about. The warning was move from the north to the south.
And just last night, we understood that they made an agreement with Egypt that Egypt would allow them to get out. Remember, Egypt has one whole side of Gaza, and that border has been closed for decades because Egypt did not want people from Gaza coming in the tunnels. It's not just above ground, it's also tunnels where they ship weapons, not on the ground, but underneath the ground. And so Egypt did its best to try to totally shut those tunnels down so that they couldn't smuggle weapons into Gaza, and vice versa.
Correct. Now, I think next, why don't you read that?
Okay.
Because we've sort of set the stage. Joshua sort of sets the stage for us. We reflected further on it, but there are certain things we need to be aware of, or to be careful not to fall into as we interact with the situation going on there. And Patrice found this earlier today.
No, it
Oh,
was
you say
yesterday.
yesterday? That's also
I
yesterday.
think it came from yesterday. I saw it today.
Okay. And I'll just let you introduce it and share that.
Okay. This is something that a person that we admire greatly shared on their Facebook page. Her name is Dahlia Lithwick. She's a journalist, and her expertise area normally is the Supreme Court. But she's Jewish, and part of her family lives in Israel. Her parents live in Israel, and I believe 2 of her sons live in Israel. So she has an ongoing daily relationship with her family, and so is seeing what they've been saying from Israel to her and back and forth. And she posted this. What she has been saying lately is we must not, in all our haste to be upset and angry and resentful and blaming people and blaming this and blaming that, and then exhibiting hate because we blame, she posted this to remind us not to do that. It's, I'll say that maybe afterwards. All right. Be careful. She didn't write this, she's just passing it along. Be careful to separate people from the policies of their governments. That's always important to do. Be careful to separate people from the actions of terrorists who live among them. Very important to do. Be careful not to collapse history and context into a narrow interpretation. Be careful not to eschew.
Great word.
I'm sorry, it's a funny word when you say it out loud. Not to eschew complexity and nuance. In other words, don't try to get away from complexity and nuance for the sake of memification. That's a new word that I've never heard. Don't try to make it into a meme. Be careful to recognize that grief for one side does not mean hate for the other side. Be careful to understand that support for one side does not mean hate for the other side. I was going to comment, but I won't. Be careful of gaslighting on a mass level, which consists of disinformation and denial of loss. Gaslighting, people, it's based on the original movie, Gaslight. And the process of gaslighting is when a person says, such and such happened at 10 o'clock last night, and the other person, who is the gaslighter, goes, I don't know what you're talking about. I was here and that didn't happen. And you keep that up. And pretty soon the original person who's sharing thinks they're crazy. Because they keep getting told, no, that was wrong. Well, I saw it with my own eyes. No, you didn't. So that's the process of gaslighting, and it is quite common in certain circles. Be careful of gaslighting on a mass level, disinformation, and denial of loss. Be careful not to dismiss the excruciating and real pain of others. Do not make it worse. Be careful not to say things online that you would not say to someone in real life. Be careful not to add hatred on top of hatred. We are all being crushed underneath its compounding weight. So true. Hatred does not help other hatred. Be careful not to lose empathy for those with whom you disagree. And this goes for the last 6 or 7 years in the United States. Be careful not to lose empathy for those with whom you disagree. Be careful not to dehumanize others. Doing so dehumanizes you. And finally, do not lose touch with the parts of you needed most. These are your compassion, your humanity, and your care.
You want to say anything further about that?
I forgot what I was going to say before, so it must not have been that important.
Okay. Okay, so some important reminders, and I'm going to say this out loud, so hopefully I'll remember as you were talking and I was listening to that all over again. I was reminded of a variation on one of the traditional prayers. We used this particular traditional prayer last night during our service, El Malay Rachamim, a very well-known conservative and leading conservative rabbi wrote a variation on that I think would be a good way to close off this particular part of the discussion when we get to that, Rabbi David Volpe. But anyhow, I wanted to share some things, both from my own reflections, but also to quote some things that I've heard as through the various broadcasts and news coverage over the last week that I think are very appropriate that we need to remember. One of the first things is something I shared last night, and that is there have been 1,300 people who have been killed, perhaps the best way to put it, slaughtered in Israel over this last week. The great majority are civilians. And to put that in perspective, if that percentage or proportion of people had died in the United States, given the percentage of the population of Israel, that would be equivalent to 45,000 people here in the United States. So this is what? That is 15 times the number of those that we lost in 9/11, just to give you some of the scope. And that's as of this particular point in time. And please remember that a lot of them, and there is video footage of this that has been shared at various levels. This has involved as Joshua pointed out already, the beheading of babies having been burned in cribs, the raping of women of all ages, the dismembering of people both dead and alive, and so forth. So the brutality has been major.
And I believe that most of this video that has been shot and released is from Hamas itself, because this is another side of their wish to terrorize Israel into leaving or giving up or moving away from the area. So this is not Israeli film shots. They're proud of what they're doing, and it's having the effective consequence, which is to drive Jews out of Israel. That is their main bottom line, because they want that territory back, is the way they see it.
Some historical notes, and I forgot to Google this just to make sure I got the right names and the right dates on these, that are part of the background here. You will hear a lot, if you've not already heard a lot, then you will hear a lot more about the problem being that there is no Palestinian state. Some historical background for that. And I forget which comes first. I think the Camp David Accords.
That was 77.
I don't know. This I'm talking about now, even later. This was during the Clinton years. a second set of accords were drawn together, and in that, Israel is going to agree to turn back over to the Palestinian people 94% of the land that had been taken over as a result of the 1967 war. And then obviously 1973 got in there as well, but I mean, what is often called the occupied territories. 94%. The large portion of what was not going to be turned over involved the city of Jerusalem, and for all kinds of reasons that was not going to happen. But it involved some other areas that would guarantee Israel's security against an incursion such as was being planned by the surrounding Arab nations in 1967 and was in fact put into effect in 1973 in the Yom Kippur War. Israel was ready to sign off on that and agree to that. I can't even think of his name. Abbas. No. Arafat.
It's been a long time since we talked about Arafat.
Yasser Arafat refused to sign that agreement. A number of years later, the Oslo Accords were put together, in which there would have been a transfer of land over to what was then the Palestinian Authority, and that would again would have involved a great bulk of the land, probably about the same percentage as Arafat said no to. And again, there was no yes coming from the Palestinian side, because inherent within a good portion of the Palestinian side is the commitment to take over all of what is Israel. Hamas itself has two stated goals. Perhaps there are some others as well, but two major goals are: number one, the destruction of all of Israel, and number two,
the Jewish
I
sections of Israel.
was going to get there. And but the destruction of Israel as a nation, and therefore to be taken over. And number two is the death of Jews. So that's what you're dealing with when you're dealing with Hamas.
I was just going to say, the religious background of this idea is that for 300 years, the area of the Middle East that Israel is now a part of. Back then, there was no Israel. It was called Greater Syria, and it was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, whose whose leadership was in Turkey. The Ottoman Empire just saw this as a backwoods area, even though there was not a lot of wood there, but a backwood part of Greater Syria. And it, as I said, ruled out of Turkey, which was totally out of touch with what happened on the ground there, especially in the last 100 years, right before World War I. World War I, Turkey was aligned with Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So they lost. That side of World War I lost. And so the Ottoman Empire was totally dismantled, literally, by the Allies. That would be mainly the UK, France, and at the very, very end, America. But America was really out of the split up of the Middle East. And so in Islamic law, once a territory has been fought over and won by Islam, in perpetuity from then on, it always belongs to Islam. So it's very easy to understand that just because Turkey, there's many exciting lights going on outside. Just because Turkey lost World War I, and therefore you did not have an Arab control of all of the Middle East anymore, and because of that, because of dividing up all the Middle East, that England or Britain or the UK was put in charge of what we call Israel now. France was put in charge of Lebanon. France was put in charge of Syria. The Britons were also put in charge of Egypt. That's how they divided up the Middle East after World War I. And when the UK said, we're done with being in control of this part of the world because it was horrific, along the lines of the struggle in Northern Ireland, that horrific, with bombings and shootings and all that. In the Islamic mind in the Middle East, they said we must take back what was already ours. They never felt that any kind of control of that area of the world by Western states was vital. So in their mind, they want to retake the control that they already had. And they don't care who makes decisions about what's going on in the Middle East. They still think that all those people need to leave, or they need to leave voluntarily, or they need to be killed so that we can have our Islamic Republic back. So that is part of the problem. That's what's causing them to be so blatant, because they feel that they are in the right. Because the Quran says, guess who inherited the land? Ishmael. That's not the same as it says in our Bibles, in Jewish and Christian Bibles, right? It doesn't say that at all. It says, in fact, it was given to Jacob and his family. So it's tricky because they feel they have right on their side because their Holy Scriptures tells them so. So it's difficult to make peace with people who disagree so inherently with what we agree with.
Okay, some more by way of historical background, then I want to come back to where we are in the present situation, some reflections on that. If you look at the population figures for just Jerusalem over the last 150 to 175 years, and you can find these in a number of museums when you visit Israel. Beginning in the 1840s to the 1860s, the Jewish people became the largest single population in Jerusalem. They were not the majority population because there were various populations, but they were the largest population. By the 1880s, the Jewish population of Jerusalem became the majority population of Jerusalem. Just to give you a bit of perspective here. And in fact, if you go down through history, there's the number of Jewish people who lived in Israel was always as many as the authorities would allow. There were some restrictions on Jewish populations in the land of Israel down through the years, but as many as the authorities would allow, that's how many Jewish people were there. Concerning the land that is now Israel, as Patrice already indicated, that was Ottoman land. That Ottoman land at the end of World War I was turned over to two mandates. I think it was two, the British and the French. It was just the two. And so that land was divided up among the two of those. As of now, over 90% and close to 95% of the land that is occupied by Israeli Jews was either Ottoman land or land that they themselves had purchased. Ottoman land, when the treaties or when the UN voted into existence the nation of Israel, that Ottoman land under the British and French mandates was separated between Syria, what became Jordan, and Israel. So that land, again, between 90 and 95% of it, maybe perhaps now as I'm thinking about it, maybe closer to 97%. I'll give you some documentation on that in a minute. Was either land that was purchased by Jews or was turned over to first from the Ottoman to the mandate governments, and then to the state of Israel that was voted into existence in 1947, 1948 by the UN. It was not Arab land. 95 or better percent of the land that Israel now occupies, that Israel is now on, was not Arab land. For some of the details and documentation on this, I think it's the 4th chapter of the book I wrote a number of years ago called The Olive Tree Connection, which is out of print. We'll give you some of the details, some of the history, some of the data sourcing that I've just sort of tried to recall and reflect on with you. That land, let me ask you a question. Has anyone heard of Mark Twain? Okay, how did Mark Twain get into all this? Well, Mark Twain visited Israel and wrote up his memoirs of when he visited Israel. And he...
Like the 1870s, I think.
Yes, I was going to say about 150 years ago, yeah. And he called it a miserable land.
He hated it there.
He said it is swampy, mosquito-ridden, the whole business. And what parts aren't swampy are desert. Well, that's the land that was passed on to the nation of Israel in 1947, 1948. That Israel has now transformed, but that's the nature of the land. So that too needs to be part of an overall perspective and historical consideration. Another thing that I need to mention is that this land was not called originally Palestine. It first became called Palestine, or actually Palestina, after the second revolt against Rome. The first revolt against Rome was in the year 66 to 70 of the first century. And ultimately it ended up in the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. There was a second revolt against Rome in 132 to 135. And that was very successful. It was successful enough that Bar Kokhba, who was the leader of that revolt, even minted coins, Israeli coins. It was after that revolt got squashed by Rome that Rome started calling Israel Palestina.
They wanted to get rid of, Rome wanted to get rid of any Jewish things about the land, and they banned Jews after 130 from even living in Jerusalem or in its environs. And so Rome decided they were going to blot out any of this Israel stuff. And they decided to name it after who they considered the indigenous people of that area. Rome thought it was the Philistines. But remember, the Philistines invaded just before the Jews arrived under Joshua. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. And the land had never been called Palestine. And in fact, Palestine is not even a correct linguistic connection to the land of the Philistines, which was called Philistia, not Palestina. So anyhow, that means, bottom line is this, let me put it crudely, Jesus never walked in Palestine. The Apostle Paul never traveled through Palestine. It did not exist as Palestine until after the 2nd century, the first third of the 2nd century. All right, so, and in fact, in World War I, there was a Palestinian brigade that fought alongside the British troops in World War I, and the Palestinian brigade was made up of Jewish people living in that part of the land. So, the original Palestinians, at least in modern times, are the Jews who fought the Jews from what was then the Ottoman Empire, who fought alongside Great Britain.
The shame of it is, and this is where the rubber hits the road, if you were able ever to collect more than one denomination's Sunday school materials, so what they're teaching their children, if you're able to get a hold of some of those and read them, you will find they use the name of the country that Yeshua walked in, Palestine, Palestine, Palestine's Palestine. So the church is not helping with the accuracy of their materials. There's no reason why they couldn't change that back to Judah, or you can say Israel, even though it's a more modern construct. Israel would have been the 10 northernmost tribes, and Judah would have been the 2 in the south. But it's because this has become part of people's mindset. You don't remember what you learned when you were a kid, but trust me, it's still in there. And you have to work to get it out of there because it stays so firmly in your background. But this is part of why there's so much miscommunication about the situation in the Middle East now. Because when Palestinians talk, everybody's going, oh, that's where Jesus lived. No, just no.
And even in this map, and the wonderful maps that we have here that Dr. Patrice uses, particularly in her historical geography course, you will find this says Palestine in Greco-Roman times. Palestine did not exist in Greco times or Greek times. It was only until latter Roman times that it existed. But on this map, on that map, the maps that we have here, the maps that are in the Bibles that we're using, they will say Palestine. It's a historical, what is it called? Anachronism.
Yes. And it's not just harmless, it is harmful in the long run because people misunderstand some of the issues when they have learned that.
Okay. Over the years, there have been numerous attacks from Gaza, missile and rocket attacks from Gaza, and even some more, how should I put it? On-foot attacks, I guess you would call them.
Yes, where
Yeah.
people climb over the fence.
Yes.
Or cut the fence and come into Israel from Gaza.
There have been numerous ones down through the years.
And they're not leaving them a present.
Yeah. And when Israel is pushed back and is going back into Gaza to push it back and to try to squash some of this, they have discovered not only the tunnels that are there, but something that a number of people who've been reflecting on the situation even to this day, they've uncovered the general process that has taken place in certainly in Gaza and in some of the other unfortunately Palestinian areas where people are used as human shields. I mean, civilians are used as human shields by those who are the militants. And for example, it was discovered one of the more recent times when Israel went into Gaza that munitions and weapons had been stored in schools and in hospitals, or under schools and under hospitals, and certainly under civilian areas, which means if Israel goes back to try to claim get rid of those munitions, that ammunition, the weapons, in order to do so, they will have to go into or through hospitals and schools. So when you hear in the news about hospitals and schools being bombed or damaged, it is because that's where the weaponry is stored, and often, very frequently, also these serve as the headquarters for some of the military leaders of Hamas. So please be aware of that, because you will see that in the news, and the news will not necessarily always remind you of what I've just shared with you. That popped something else into my mind, and that is, we learned just last night, I believe, in a document that was a secret document that was found among some of the dead Hamas soldiers, some of the leaders of dead Hamas soldiers, that the primary targets for this Hamas attack were elementary schools and youth centers.
That they had found written documents that the Hamas guys had carried in their pockets about how to get into certain schools that were closest to the Gaza Strip. And yeah, it's very clear they intended to go into schools. That was their primary purpose.
Yes. The primary targets were, according to these documents that have been uncovered in the last 2 days, were elementary schools and youth centers. And please recall that some 260 plus young people were killed were slaughtered at the music festival that was one of the main targets.
That was in the Negev.
That was in the Negev. That was one of the main targets at end of Sukkot musical festival. All right, so those are just some of the things, some of the perspectives you need to have as you listen to what's going on, as you watch what's going on. And what's going to happen is some of these perspectives are going to drift into the background as more and more Palestinians die in Gaza as this war goes on.
I think this is what you're going to start to see in the coverage. Now, up to, say, at least yesterday, we were getting, John and I were very impressed with the quality of what we were hearing on TV. In other words, it was very much, this is terrible that this should happen to Israel. They were caught unawares. They're an ally and we want to support them. And then they started putting on actual people from Israel who had lost someone or had seen an incident where their loved ones were involved or had been at one of the kibbutzim on the border of Gaza that, you know, had suffered because they were the first ones that were entered by Hamas. And it's very, in a certain way, it's very nice to hear a sad story, a tragic story from a person who's actually seen it live and in person. But it doesn't really, after a while, it doesn't carry a lot of weight to it when all of a sudden now it's Gaza that's under attack and they're going to start showing their complaints and how cruel Israel has been to them, and they're going to have, and this happened to my son, and this happened to my house, and this happened here. And so I think you're going to see the viewpoint of the first several days changing over to a more Gazan central viewpoint. And trust me, for every sad, tragic story that they had on for 5 days, now they're going to have double the tragic stories about the Gazan, the hospitals, the daycare centers, there's no electricity, and it's portrayed as this is all Israel's fault. And I think that is what we dread the most, is once it's going to start sounding, this is all Israel's fault. This is not Hamas's fault. Hamas was so angry that they had to do this. The argument that people are so angry about something that they must do this, or you could totally understand that they were so angry about this that they had to do this. Well, I don't understand why Israel doesn't understand that. Unfortunately, the more people show anger, the more strangers. Let's say you're seeing somebody you don't know and they're expressing so much anger and outrage. You feel bad for them. You think, well, no wonder they acted out. No wonder they did unacceptable. They're so angry. And people then sort of don't keep saying that what they did was unacceptable. It becomes acceptable because they were so angry. They can't control themselves. And John and I have been in a personal situation a long time ago. And we were sort of, in a real way, we were pushed out of somewhere by a group that used to be our friends. And here's what happened. The people who were listening to, what happened and trying to give wisdom to, they were overwhelmed by the anger of the people against us. And from then on, they said, well, I don't think we could do anything because they're so angry. And I think that's a human tenet. I don't think it's necessary among believers. I think believers are still human and they still allow these things to sway their mind. If you're angry and you act out and what you do is against the law or evil or underhanded or just terrible human behavior, you can't get forgiven unless you admit it. It doesn't give you the right to do anything. As I said, when we were in that situation, they're so angry, they could have gone and smashed the windshield of our car And the group that was listening would have gone, well, they were angry. It was wrong. It was, I don't care how angry you are. I don't hear people saying, I don't care how angry you are. You can't do that. And you're going to be held to account for it because the anger overwhelms them. It's a very, I hate to see that about human behavior, but I think it's part of human behavior. And the Gazans, Hamas is really angry.
Okay.
Should we sort of wind this down?
I want to wind this
And-
and leave, open some time for questions, but I also want to grab that prayer that I.
Yeah.
Okay. What I want to do at this stage is just share with you, I'm going to quote some of the people from our government, and the reason I'm quoting them is because they are the ones who've had access to information that we as a public have not had access to.
They've seen the films.
They've seen the films, and some of them are not for public viewing because of the nature of them. Just some short statements. This comes from our president, and he described what was going on as, quote, a campaign of pure cruelty, the deadliest days since the Holocaust. And then he went on to say, the downplaying of Hamas's atrocities is unthinkable. Our Secretary of Defense described what went on as worse than, or Hamas as worse, quote, worse than ISIS. One of the people in the national security area for our government, John Kirby, said, quote, it's worse than 9/11. To quote our Vice President, these are extreme acts of terrorism for which there is absolutely no justification. Our Secretary of State said, and I quote, it's simply depravity in the worst imaginable way. So these are just the assessments of those who know more than we know because they've had access, thanks to what Patrice already mentioned, the videos that are there and that are shared at the highest levels of government from one to the other. Now, that's the assessment of those who know far more than what we have known or we have shared. But I want to say, again, something from what our friend Joshua put, and now when I say I mean I'm not now just quoting Joshua, but I'm also now referring to me as the I. Of course, Israel is not perfect, and those who know me personally know I have been quite critical of certain Israeli policies, and particularly its current government. I have been especially critical of the treatment of Palestinians and other minorities, but the double standard toward Israel must stop. No other country would passively do nothing following the surprise slaughter of 1,300 of its citizens, the beheading of babies, rape, brutal murders of entire families, parading bodies in the streets, dragged behind cars and motorcycles, and the taking of 150 hostages. So, all of that is part of this story. Cliff, you had a question, and if others have questions, we'll take them. Give us 30 seconds just to sort of take a deep breath. I want to find that prayer, and then I'll use that as closing this off.
Yeah.
So,
You want Cliff to ask this question now?
I want to hear it.
Oh, okay.
So hang on a second.
We should be playing some kind of music
Yeah.
in the background.
Hum something.
Do, 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 you have to go through a twist for the whole time period so they get to write their answers down. But anyway, yeah, this is a week ago. Well, actually, let's say 8 days ago. We never would have dreamed that we would be having all of these discussions that we've had in the past week. It's been a lot. I think most people in America would say it's been a lot. And so we hope and we pray that this is going to be the last time we have to think about this in a great deal, but we also know that's not true. So we'll have to learn to live with disappointment. But remember, just because you're angry does not mean what you're doing is right.
Okay, our normal custom is to allow those who are actually sitting here in front of us to ask questions first, and then those who've joined us virtually to ask questions. And so, Cliff.
I actually just clicked on where you were talking about the anger eating people up, and I clicked on your Cain and Abel sermonette last night, specifically the scripture saying that sin was waiting at the door to devour. In terms of the anger, if we don't put it down, it can devour us.
Oh, we see it like every day on the news.
That was all.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good observation.
Yeah,
thank you.
The story of Cain and Abel is what he's referring to, which is what I discussed last night during Shabbat services. People don't really look at that story very in depth, and I thought it was worthwhile looking in depth last night because it was part of the weekly Torah portion. But yeah, Cain is he's so angry. He's so angry that God did not bless him in any kind of similar way to the way God blessed and said good things about Abel, that it totally made him lose control of his situation. And God warns him and says, sin is waiting, encroaching at the door. And if you go out there and it attacks you, you're lost. And there's no way that you can justify these actions that you're taking if you're under control of anger. And I think that is, this is not a psychological treatise, but I think this idea that you come to moments in your life, and if you make a step in just maybe one step or two steps in the wrong direction, it can eat you up. It just can. Because for you as a person, it's too much. Maybe for me as a person, it wouldn't be, or him. But for you as a person, there are certain steps that people can do to you or do in front of you or that you see, and it pushes you over a line that's really a dangerous line. Maybe I should have said that last time.
That's okay.
I was a little distracted by a few things, like the microphone falling down all the time. But thank you, Cliff, for saying that. I appreciate
Well,
that.
thank you for last night.
Well, seeing anger in the Bible, I think, is important. It's important to see the comeuppance of what happens. He lost everything, Cain did. Not only, it seems like he lost his family, he lost his land, he never saw his parents again. It's tragic what happened there. It's tragic. It was probably not. And I'm glad we're told what happened to him, even though it's an unhappy story.
Okay, any other questions from those of you who are here? Okay, those of you who've joined us virtually, do you have any questions? Either related to what we've talked about or in general?
Yes, ma'am.
I guess that's a resounding silence.
Oh,
I sent one in by email.
Okay, you must have sent it in after we left the house.
when did you send it?
A couple of days or 3 or something. I don't know.
In that case, Carolyn, it never got to
We
us.
didn't. You might want to resend
Really?
it and
Yes.
make sure that you type it
Okay,
in
well,
correctly.
the question was in Revelations chapter 5, verse 6, which made it easy to remember.
5, 6, yes, of course.
It talks in some Bible translation, it actually says the 7 spirits of God, and in the one I read when I sent it in, it said the sevenfold spirit of God.
Yes.
So what 7 spirits? I don't know about this.
Okay. Not all questions from Revelation are easy to answer. This one is easy to answer. The translation that has it as the sevenfold Spirit of God is in fact correct and is in all likelihood a reference back to Isaiah is it 62? It's the Haftarah passage that Yeshua reads in the synagogue. I think it's in Luke chapter 4. And it says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, the Spirit of bump, ba-dump, 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 ba-dump. And if you read it, I think you'll find 7. So it is, as you often find in the book of Revelation, you find hints, allusions, echoes of the biblical passage of the biblical text of the Older Testament. You'll find those throughout the book of Revelation. This is just another one of those. And in this case, it's a reference back to that Isaiah text, where which
Do you
Yeshua.
happen to know which Isaiah text that is? I'll look it up.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll try to find it in Luke and see if they reference it.
They will.
So let me.
You said Luke 4?
I think it's Luke 4. So it's when Yeshua is in the synagogue.
Is it 61?
I'm thinking it's 61. And if it is 61, then it's the opening paragraph. But let's see if we can find it. Okay, it wasn't Luke chapter 4. No, wait a second.
The Spirit of the Lord is upon me,
Yeah.
61.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Okay, thank you.
That's Luke 4:18.
Okay. So Yeshua is referencing that text, and the Revelation text seems to reference that same text. So Isaiah 61, and it's the opening paragraph, is it not, Cliff?
I'm still looking for this part of the Spirit of the Lord. No, I'm still looking for the part which says this, the spirits.
Oh, it doesn't say spirits. Oh,
Oh, the 7 spirits. Yeah, it depends on your translation. Part of the issue here, Carolyn, is that Revelation is not like the Gospels, and it's not like the letters that Rav Shaul wrote. It's a part of
okay, yes, you're right.
it's a
not
part of the
there.
Bible
It's in
that's
another text.
apocalyptic. And apocalyptic literature is there are other books in the Bible
I
that
got
are
it.
apocalyptic literature too. And when you have apocalyptic literature, you're not supposed to take it as I was walking down the street one day and I saw a tree. It's almost all metaphors and figures of speech and symbolism. So it's
I can understand that, but I didn't understand sevenfold or 7 spirits, it still does mean something.
yes,
And so I was looking for that.
right, but it may not mean 7 things that I can count on my fingers.
Okay.
You have to give it a lot of leeway, and I guess when we finally get to be with the Lord, He will have a seminar and explain all
There's
those
a
things to
lot of
us
things.
because we missed it, and it would be easier to understand if we were closer to that time period. And then we would hear the allusions or see the allusions much more clearly. But right now, we just have modern life, so.
Okay, what Yeshua quotes is Isaiah 61, where it says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, but that in itself has resonance and echoes back to Isaiah chapter 11, which is what I thought the other passage was. And that you'll recognize fairly quickly. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse, from his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him. The Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and power, the Spirit of knowledge, and of the fear of the Lord. So you'll find 7 references to the Spirit of God there. And so in all likelihood, that is the reference. And in a sense, Yeshua, in saying the Spirit of the Lord is upon me from Isaiah 61, also echoed back then, since the Spirit of the Lord will rest on this one who's called the branch of David. That was obviously an indirect reference back to that as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sending it in, even though it never arrived. Okay, any other questions? All right, then, as promised, let me share with you an updated El Malay Rachamim, the compassionate God, and it applies to our discussion of what's going on in Israel and in Gaza right now, and the way in which we should react to it. We pray not to wipe out haters, but to banish hatred, not to destroy sinners, but to lessen sin. Our prayers are not for a perfect world, but for a better one. where parents are not bereaved by the savagery of sudden attacks, or children orphaned by blades glinting in a noonday sun. Help us, dear God, to have the courage to remain strong, to stand fast. Spread your light on the dark hearts of the slayers, and your comfort to the bereaved hearts of the families of the slain. Let calm return to your city Jerusalem, and to Israel, your blessed land. We grieve with those wounded in body and spirit. Pray for the fortitude of our sisters and brothers, and ask you, O compassionate God, to awaken the world to our struggle and help us bring peace. I thought that was very well done, and it's an appropriate reminder for us as we close, for now, this particular discussion. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you want some more details on the context of the establishment of the State of Israel in 1947-1948, you can get a hold of the Olive Tree Connection. You will find a chapter devoted to it there. And I will say that, I will just leave it at that for now. Okay. We have in the synagogue calendar the next Stump the Stars Jewish Style scheduled for October 28th. Unfortunately, Dr. Patrice and I have been asked to speak to a Southeast Regional Conference of the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations.
So we'll be out of town.
So we will be across the state at that particular time. So
I'm sure you're welcome to come. Where are they having this?
I was trying to think of where that congregation is located. Directly
East of us.
Directly
so
east,
on the east coast of
on
Florida.
the east coast of Florida. So there will be no Stump the Stars in October 28th. The next one will occur then in November.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to guess whatever the second Saturday of November is.
I have here in my brand new
I thought you might.
calendar. Don't ask me what happened to the other one. So the 4th, it goes 4th, 11th, 18th, 25th.
So we will do it. The likelihood is November 11th. So that'll make it easy to remember.
Veterans Day.
Not only that, it's 11/11.
Oh, well, that's my point.
Yeah.
That's why it's Veterans Day. Remember, it was the 11th hour and the 11th minute of the 11th day of the 11th month is when World War I was ended.
All right. And so some more history going back to World War I. Thrown into what we did earlier. Do stay tuned, however, in case something happens that does get changed for whatever reason. So that's when we next expect to get together. I will say again that we do have some other questions that we will get to that were turned into us in the last couple of days that are not related to this subject.
And Carolyn, if you want to ask us another question, but I hope it wasn't something where it was misspelled or something and then it goes into the dead letter file and never comes out. But we didn't get it, so we apologize.
So yes, for the questions on rapture and on reincarnation, and those are two different questions, not related questions.
Not related.
We will hope to get to those the next time for those of you who join us later who are looking for answers to those questions. Okay, that being said, we can close for us in prayer.
You want me to close in prayer?
I opened, I thought you might close.
Can I ask one thing before we actually close?
Sure.
The prayer that you shared,
Yes.
Rabbi,
Yes, ma'am.
can that be sent or given to us?
Where did you get it from?
Yeah.
Did you get it off Facebook?
Okay, yes.
He doesn't use Twitter, so he didn't get it off.
No, I didn't get it off of X.
Or X.
I'm not sure I saw it on Facebook, but what I copied from the top of it as I copied it over, it was at the Ann Arbor. Oh, I know where this was from. I think I got this from some of our friends because in Ann Arbor,
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
where we have a Messianic
A
synagogue.
Messianic synagogue. It says it had a vigil, and this conservative rabbi, his name is Rabbi David Volpe. So WOLPE. And I bet if you Google Rabbi David Volpe and the Ann Arbor Vigil, you might find it. Because if it's been published publicly.
Read publicly, yeah.
Is this from this week?
Yes.
So this happened evidently just this week. Or this prayer was sent around this week.
Yes, and I'm guessing it may have even happened last Saturday, but I don't remember. But anyhow, I did print it out. I have it in front of me. For those of you who would like copies, I will certainly be happy to.
That might be something we could give out next Friday night too. People
Yeah.
might enjoy it.
Well, I was also going to potentially read it next Friday night.
Yeah, but then you can
Yes.
pass it out if they have it available, if people wanted to get a copy of it.
So
I would like that very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there we go. If you come by the synagogue before then, it will be readily available then as well, Jenny.
Just pay $50 and you can get a copy of it. Cheap this week. Next week, 100.
Okay.
Oh, did I pray yet? I
No, you
guess I
haven't
better
prayed.
pray for teasing Jenny.
Yes.
For trolling people. Bad, bad. Okay. Avinu Malchenu, our Father and our King. You are a great God, and it is a privilege to serve you. We thank you for this week, although it's been a difficult week. We want to acknowledge that you are in control of Israel and you're in control of world events. And so we are looking to you to see the light in the darkness, to see the hope where it seems like there is very little hope, and help us to keep looking to you for our answers and not looking around us at human beings. Thank you for protecting us, guiding us. Thank you for being with our families, our loved ones, and we don't ever want to take your care of us for granted. But be with our people in Israel, whether they acknowledge Yeshua or not. Be with the nation and guide them into good actions that you are happy with, Father. Thank you for all you do for us every day. B'Shem Yeshua, Meshachenu, in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen.
P.S. Your prayer reminded me one other thing I wanted to say about the actions of Israel. As it has been in the past, so it is already happening again now. Before Israel will bomb an area, they will leaflet the area to alert the civilians to leave those buildings, because those buildings are military targets for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And they also have something called I forget exactly how they describe it, but you would call it tapping. They drop things that sort of bounce on the roofs of those buildings that are going to be bombed, to alert the people inside that it's time to leave those buildings. So that is part of standard Israeli military practice. It has been in the past, and just last night we saw some of the video of the
It
leaflet.
showed some old leaflets.
So that's a PS and an important one. Okay, with that being said, then we will say one other thing. Shavua Tov.
Lehitzaot. Shavua Tov.
What time does Stump the Stars start?
7 o'clock.
Oh, okay, because I tried to tune in at 6 and didn't get in for 15 minutes. That's why I was so late logging on.
That's because we were having technical
There was
difficulties.
technical difficulties here.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So,
So-
because we came on and we went, there's nobody out there. And then it turned out about 15 minutes later, oh, there you were. So, yeah, don't take that
So
personally.
it's at 7 then.
Yes, it is.
6 o'clock your time, yes.
And we were here. We weren't driving up. We were actually